Hey everyone, welcome back. We're doing a deep dive today into something I find really fascinating. It's the world of sound frequencies and their potential effects.
Hmm.
You know, um, we got this really interesting account from a listener, and they claim to have witnessed something totally bizarre
Oh, wow.
while experimenting with a specific frequency, 432 hertz.
Interesting.
So before we get into exactly what they experienced, I think it'd be fun to actually give our listeners a little taste of what we're talking about. So let's play a snippet of this 432 hertz frequency.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe not the most, beautiful or pleasant sound in the world. I'm kind of curious, what was your first impression?
Yeah, I can see why someone would call this an annoying tone.
Right, jarring. So we often associate, specific frequencies with certain effects, like some are good for sleep, some for focus, et cetera, et cetera. But this deep dive is going to be focused on this one person's very specific and visual experience with 432 hertz.
Definitely. And just to be clear, this is just one person's account. So, to get the full picture, I think it's helpful to break down their experiment. They put a speaker in the middle of a room, facing upwards, and they played this 432 hertz tone through it. What happened next is where things get a little strange.
So they're playing this tone, and all of a sudden they describe seeing this dark, almost teardrop shaped formation appear above the speaker. They say it grows larger for a bit before disappearing completely. Sound creating a visible shape? That's wild.
It really captures the imagination. But it's important to remember this is just an anecdotal account. We don't have scientific evidence.
Right.
No data, no controlled experiments, other witnesses. This is where that critical thinking comes in.
So, what are some things we should be considering when we hear an account like this? What could explain this other than sound waves actually creating a visible shape?
Well, for one, the placebo effect. If this person went into this expecting something unusual to happen, their mind might have influenced what they perceived. That power of suggestion can be really strong.
Right, like when people claim to feel better after taking a sugar pill because they believe it's medicine, their expectation creates the effect, not the pill itself.
Exactly. It's also worth noting that our perception can be influenced by many things. Our state of mind, the environment, our cultural background even. It's not always a simple matter of just seeing what's objectively there.
Okay, so the placebo effect and just the complexities of perception, definitely things to keep in mind. But there is another layer to this story, right? The source also describes a change in the room's energy while the tone was playing. They described it as this palpable and almost static sensation. What could explain that?
That detail is interesting. Makes me think about infrasound. Have you ever heard of that?
I've heard the term, but I don't really know what it is.
Okay. So infrasound refers to sound frequencies that are below the range of human hearing. Essentially, they're too low for our ears to pick up.
So we can't even hear these sounds, but they can still affect us.
Precisely. While we might not consciously hear infrasound, it can still interact with our bodies and environment. There's some research suggesting that exposure to certain infrasound frequencies can produce feelings of unease, anxiety, or even chills. Some people think it's responsible for that haunted feeling you get in certain places.
So maybe that static sensation our source described could be linked to infrasound. It's like our bodies are sensing something that our ears can't detect.
It's certainly a possibility worth considering. Of course, to know for sure, we'd need a lot more information about the specific frequencies involved in the experiment and a way to measure any potential infrasound present in the room.
Okay, so we've got the placebo effect, we've got the complexities of perception, and now infrasound. It sounds like there's a lot more to sound than just what we hear.
Absolutely. What's really fascinating is this individual wants to continue experimenting with this 432 hertz frequency. It makes you wonder, if you were in their shoes, would you keep going?
Right. Would you be curious enough to try and replicate this experiment yourself? And if so, how would you go about it? What precautions might you take to make sure your results were as reliable as possible? We'll pick up right here after a quick break.
Sounds good. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about infrasound, those frequencies we can't hear, but might still be able to perceive in other ways. It really makes you wonder, what else is out there that we're just missing?
It's like realizing there's this whole invisible world of sound happening around us all the time. It definitely makes you think twice about the limitations of our senses.
Exactly. And that brings us to another interesting point, the limitations of our current scientific understanding. What we consider impossible today might be proven true tomorrow.
I've always loved that quote. The universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can imagine. It always seems like every time we think we've figured things out, something new comes along and just totally challenges our assumptions.
I couldn't agree more. And that's what makes exploring these topics so exciting. So let's get back to our sources experiment for a second. We're trying to figure out what could have caused that dark shape to appear above the speaker. And they specifically mentioned that the speaker was pointing upwards. Do you think the direction of the sound waves could have played a role?
Yeah. I was wondering about that myself. It seems like it could be significant, right? The way sound waves travel and spread out through space, I mean, it's got to have some impact on their effects. It's like how a megaphone amplifies sound by directing it in a focused beam.
That's a great analogy.
Mhm.
And it actually relates to a scientific concept called acoustic levitation.
Wait, acoustic levitation? Is that like using sound to make things float?
You got it. Scientists have been able to use intense sound waves to levitate small objects for a while now. Essentially, the sound waves create a pressure field that counteracts gravity.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, it sounds like something straight out of science fiction, but are you suggesting that maybe this 432 hertz tone created some kind of levitation effect? Like instead of lifting an actual physical object, it somehow manifested as this dark shape in the air?
It's a very intriguing idea. But we need to be cautious about making those kinds of leaps without more evidence. Acoustic levitation usually requires very specific conditions, controlled environments, often with high-intensity ultrasound. It's not something that's likely to happen spontaneously just by playing a tone on a regular speaker.
Okay. So maybe not levitation in the traditional sense.
Right.
But it does make you wonder, what if there's something more to it than that? What if the combination of the specific frequency and the direction of the sound waves created some kind of interaction with the air molecules, or something we don't fully understand yet? I mean, we're still learning so much about the nature of sound and energy.
You're right, there's still so much we just don't know. And I think this case highlights the importance of approaching these kinds of phenomena from multiple perspectives. It's not just about physics or acoustics, it's about understanding the interplay of those fields with our perception, our consciousness, even our cultural beliefs about sound.
It's like that saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We need to have all sorts of different tools in our toolkit to really get to the bottom of these mysteries.
Precisely. We need physicists, acoustics experts, psychologists, maybe even anthropologists and philosophers, all working together to really make sense of these complex experiences.
It's kind of humbling, isn't it, to think that even with all of our scientific advances, there are still these fundamental mysteries that we're really just scratching the surface of.
Absolutely. And that sense of wonder is what keeps us going, is what drives us to explore and discover.
Yeah.
But speaking of different perspectives, there's one more crucial aspect we need to consider, and I think it's really at the heart of all this.
Ooh, I love a good cliffhanger. Lay it on us. What else do we need to consider?
The role of perception and consciousness. How much of what we experience is shaped by our own minds, our beliefs, our expectations. We'll dive into that more right after the break. Don't go anywhere.
Ooh, I'm on the edge of my seat. Can't wait to hear more.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before the break, we were left with this big question about the role of perception and consciousness in all of this. It really makes you think. Could what we believe or expect actually influence what we experience, especially when it comes to something like sound?
It's a question that's been debated for centuries. Think about it. How much of what we perceive as real is actually filtered through our own individual lens? Our beliefs, our past experiences, even our cultural backgrounds, all play a role in shaping how we interpret the world around us.
Right, like that saying, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. So how does that relate to our discussion about sound frequencies? Well, consider this 432 hertz experience we've been discussing. It's possible that this individual's belief in the power of sound or their expectation of something unusual happening played a role in what they perceived. It's not that they were intentionally deceiving themselves, but their mind might have, unconsciously filled in the gaps or interpreted ambiguous sensory information in a way that just aligned with their beliefs.
Okay, so even if there wasn't actually a visible dark shape forming above the speaker, they might have genuinely believed they saw it because they were primed to expect something extraordinary. I guess that makes sense. But it still leaves me wondering, what about that feeling of static they described? Could that have been influenced by their expectations too?
It's certainly possible. Our minds and bodies are so deeply interconnected. If you're expecting to feel a certain way, you're more likely to interpret physical sensations in a way that confirms that expectation. Think about how easily we can convince ourselves we're coming down with a cold if we hear that everyone at work is sick.
Oh, yeah, that's so true. It's like our minds are always looking for patterns and explanations, even if they're not really there.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to approach these kinds of subjective experiences with a healthy dose of skepticism while also acknowledging the power of that mind-body connection. We can't just dismiss them as all in their head, but we also can't take them at face value without considering all the potential factors at play.
Okay, so we've got this complex interplay of sound frequencies, perception, and consciousness. It's almost like sound is more than just something we hear, it's something we feel, something we interpret, something that can even influence our state of being.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not a new idea either. A lot of ancient cultures have long recognized the power of sound and vibration to influence our physical, emotional, and even spiritual well-being. Think about the use of chanting, mantras, and specific musical scales in different spiritual traditions. They're all based on the understanding that sound can resonate with different aspects of our being.
It's amazing how modern science is starting to validate what these ancient traditions have known for centuries. I guess we're all just vibrations in the end, right?
You could say that. And who knows what other mysteries we'll uncover as we continue to explore the intersection of sound, consciousness, and reality. I mean, we've only just scratched the surface.
I know. It's like we've opened up this Pandora's box of questions. But that's what makes it so fascinating. It's this constant journey of discovery. So, before we wrap things up, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with today?
I think the most important thing is to just cultivate a sense of curiosity and open-mindedness. Don't just take our word for it. Go out and explore for yourselves. Experiment with different sounds and frequencies. Pay attention to how they make you feel, what thoughts or images they evoke. You might be surprised by what you discover.
I love that. It's like we're giving our listeners a sonic homework assignment. Go out and explore the world of sound. And who knows, maybe one of our listeners will make the next big breakthrough in our understanding of sound and consciousness.
Anything is possible. The world is full of mysteries waiting to be unraveled.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of sound frequencies and their potential effects. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep listening.